I still remember the first day I stepped into their home, a place that would soon become both my prison and my unexpected stage for change. The house looked grand from the outside, with tall windows that reflected the morning sun, neat flower beds lining the driveway, and a door that seemed to promise warmth and welcome. But the moment I walked through it, I realized that appearances could be deceiving. The family I had come to work for, the Martins, smiled politely, spoke with courtesy, but their eyes always carried a weight of expectation, of judgment, of a world where I had no voice. My role was clear from the beginning: cook, clean, organize, and anticipate every need before it was even spoken. I tried to smile through it, to blend in and not draw attention, thinking that if I did my work well, perhaps they would see me as more than just a servant. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that no matter how much I did, nothing I did was enough. I polished the silver until it shone, prepared meals that smelled like heaven, arranged flowers with care, and still their eyes would pass over me, noticing only the smallest flaws. When I spoke, my words seemed to vanish into the air, unheard and unvalued. I began to shrink into myself, learning to move silently through rooms as if I were a ghost in their world, always present but never acknowledged. Their children were polite but distant, their laughter never included me. I ate alone, cleaned alone, and sometimes, when the house was quiet at night, I would sit by the window and watch the stars, wondering if the world outside held a place where someone like me could be seen and heard. One rainy afternoon, everything changed. The sky had turned a deep gray, the kind that makes the streets glisten with reflections, and the wind carry the smell of wet earth. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, when a sudden scream echoed from the living room. I dropped the knife, my heart racing, and ran toward the sound. There I found Mr. Martin on the floor, clutching his chest, gasping for air, eyes wide with fear. Mrs. Martin and the children were frozen in panic, unable to move, paralyzed by shock. Without thinking, I rushed to his side, checking for a pulse, listening for his breath, calling his name softly, urging him to stay with us. I could feel my own hands shaking, my heart pounding like a drum, but something inside me sharpened, a clarity, a focus I had never known before. I barked instructions to Mrs. Martin, telling her to fetch the phone and call for an ambulance, and she obeyed, her usual composure shattered by fear. I pressed on Mr. Martin's chest as I had seen in videos, keeping my voice steady, counting out the beats, whispering words of encouragement, willing him to stay. The minutes stretched endlessly, every second heavy and frightening, until the wail of sirens finally reached the house, signaling that help was on the way. Paramedics rushed in, taking over, asking questions, and treating him with urgency, and through it all, I remained by his side, guiding them through his medications, his medical history, the exact location of his prescriptions, the little details that could save him. After what felt like an eternity, the paramedics stabilized him, loading him carefully into the ambulance. Mrs. Martin clung to me, tears streaming down her face, and I saw for the first time a flicker of gratitude, of recognition, of the human connection I had been missing all this time. That night, when the house was finally quiet again, I sat alone in the kitchen, the weight of everything I had done pressing down on me. For the first time, I realized that despite being treated like a servant, despite the years of being overlooked, the world had handed me a moment where I mattered, where my knowledge, my calmness, my actions could save someone's life. And I knew that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. Not for them, not for me, not for the fragile balance of power and respect in that house. I didn't feel pride exactly, but a quiet, steady strength. I understood that life could demand we step into roles we never imagined, that value and recognition are not always granted until the moment we prove it matters most. And as I sat there, staring at the rain tracing patterns against the window, I realized that the very people who had dismissed me, overlooked me, and treated me as invisible, would soon learn that I was not only present, I was essential, and nothing in that house would ever remain the same again. The day after Mr. Martin's collapse, the house felt strangely different, like a fragile line had been drawn between the past and the present, between who I had been and who I was becoming. The usual silence I had carried around like a shadow was still there, but now it was mixed with tension and a quiet awareness, a subtle acknowledgement that something had shifted. I moved through the rooms, cleaning, arranging, and preparing breakfast, but their eyes were on me in a new way. Mrs. Martin watched every movement, her lips pressed together as if she were trying to hold back words, trying to find the right ones to express something she had long refused to say. The children, normally distant and polite, lingered a little longer in the kitchen, their curiosity cautiously peeking through, as if testing whether I was really the same person they had ignored for so long. And Mr. Martin himself, though still weak, met my gaze with an intensity that unsettled me. It wasn't fear exactly, but something like recognition. He now knew that the woman they had dismissed for years had been the one to keep him alive. Breakfast was quiet, the clinking of cutlery sounding unusually loud in the still morning. I served the plates as usual, but this time no one spoke first. When Mr. Martin finally said, "Thank you," it felt heavy with a weight that went beyond politeness. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that anyone in that house had truly seen me. I nodded, saying softly, "It was nothing. I just did what had to be done." But inside, a spark of something new ignited. They were beginning to understand that I was capable, that my presence mattered, and that my calmness in a crisis had tipped the balance between life and death. The day wore on, and small requests began to follow: a phone call that needed making, a medication that had been misplaced, a minor accident in the kitchen that required quick thinking. Each time, I acted with the same composure I had shown during the emergency. And each time, the family's eyes lingered on me longer, filled with a mixture of surprise, relief, and a silent apology for how they had treated me before. It wasn't immediate, the shift from servant to essential, but it was steady, subtle, undeniable. By midday, I realized that the house had begun to depend on me in ways no one had ever admitted before. And with that realization came a quiet, intoxicating sense of power, not cruel or arrogant, but grounded in the simple truth that I had earned their trust through my actions, through my ability to remain calm when fear had paralyzed them. Mrs. Martin approached me quietly in the afternoon, her hands wringing a small dish towel. I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. I shook my head gently. "You don't need to, just please take care of him." But I noticed the way she lingered, how her eyes softened, how the walls she had built around herself and me for years were starting to crack. Even the children, who had once ignored my presence, began to offer small gestures of acknowledgement, a hand held for a moment too long, a shy question, a glance that lingered with curiosity instead of dismissal. That evening, when the house finally quieted down and Mr. Martin had been tucked into bed with the nurse's instructions followed to the letter, I sat in the living room, cleaning the coffee table, and reflected on the day. I realized something profound. The family who had treated me like I was invisible, like I was replaceable, had no choice now but to rely on me, not just for comfort but for survival. It was an odd feeling, one that mixed satisfaction with unease. I had never sought to wield power over them. I had never wanted to feel superior. But their reliance reminded me that strength is often invisible until circumstance demands it, and recognition often comes not through words, but through actions that leave no room for ignorance. The days that followed repeated the same pattern. Small emergencies, forgotten details, medical appointments, and even mundane household crises were handled with my guidance. Each time, the family looked to me for direction, for wisdom, for calm. And each time, I felt a subtle but growing shift within the house, a recognition of my worth, a slow acknowledgement that I was not just a worker, not just someone to serve, but someone who held the ability to make a difference when it mattered most. One rainy afternoon, as I organized the living room after cleaning, Mr. Martin approached me hesitantly. He rested his hand lightly on my shoulder, an action so foreign it startled me. I don't know what I would have done without you," he admitted quietly, voice trembling slightly. I smiled gently, nodding. "I'm here now, that's what matters." He lingered a moment longer, as if testing the reality of my presence before walking away. I realized then that he had been forced to confront the limitations of pride and the need for humility, that he had been reminded that even those he had overlooked for years could possess qualities he had never expected. And it was not just Mr. Martin. The entire family seemed to shift imperceptibly. Walls of indifference softened, stares became kinder, and questions, tentative at first, began to emerge from the children. One night, I overheard Mrs. Martin speaking quietly to the housekeeper she trusted, saying, "She saved him. I didn't believe it before, but she matters." The words settled in me, not like a triumph, but like a quiet truth. I realized that my place in the house had changed irreversibly. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer ignored. I had stepped into a role they had never imagined I could fill, a role defined not by servitude, but by the quiet strength and skill that became essential in their moment of crisis. And with that role came responsibility, yes, but also clarity. I understood now that respect is rarely given freely, it is earned, and often in ways that are tested by fire, by fear, by circumstances that demand action. I felt a subtle pride, tempered by empathy, as I moved through the house that night. The family that had overlooked me, that had treated me as invisible, was beginning to understand the truth of who I was. I knew there would be challenges ahead, that not every day would offer the chance to prove myself, that the tension of old dynamics could return. But in that quiet moment, sitting by the window as the rain traced patterns on the glass, I understood that the balance of power had shifted, and nothing in the house would ever be the same again. I had become essential, not by choice but by circumstance, and I knew that the days ahead would test not just their reliance on me, but their capacity to see me, to trust me, and ultimately to respect me. And for the first time in years, I felt that invisible weight of dismissal lift, replaced by a quiet, steady certainty. I mattered, and no one could take that from me. Over the next few days, the house seemed to shift in ways I had never anticipated. The Martins, who had once treated me with distant politeness and subtle indifference, now looked at me with something heavier, something like acknowledgement, but also unease. It was clear that they had begun to understand that the quiet, invisible person they had ignored for so long was now essential to their lives. And with that realization came both gratitude and a subtle fear of dependency. I moved through each room with the same careful precision I always had, yet I noticed the way their eyes followed my movements, noting the smallest gestures, measuring the effectiveness of my every action. Mrs. Martin would pause mid-sentence, letting me finish an explanation or a task before speaking again, as if learning to trust my judgment after years of dismissing it. The children, once playful and distant, began asking questions, sometimes small, practical things, sometimes hesitant inquiries into how I managed to remain calm when the world seemed to collapse around me. Even Mr. Martin, recovering slowly from his heart episode, sought my advice on minor health decisions, on daily routines, on things he would have previously handled himself or ignored entirely. And every time they turned to me, I felt the strange mix of responsibility and quiet pride swell inside me. It wasn't about control, not in the way some might think. It was about presence, being there when it mattered most, being the one whose decisions and actions could tip the balance from fear to stability, from chaos to calm. One morning, as I was preparing breakfast, Mrs. Martin appeared at the doorway looking hesitant, her hands clasped tightly. "Can you show me how to manage his medications properly?" she asked, voice low and uncertain. I nodded, gesturing for her to come closer. As I carefully explained the schedule, the dosages, the precautions, I noticed the tremor in her hands, the way her eyes darted to mine for reassurance. It struck me then that the same people who had once treated me like a servant now depended on me in ways they had never imagined. I guided her patiently, repeating instructions until she felt confident, watching the subtle transformation in her expression from fear to understanding. Later that day, I found Mr. Martin alone in the study, flipping through papers with a frown of frustration. "I can't keep track of all this," he admitted quietly. "I don't know how I survived before you helped me organize it." I offered a small smile, sitting beside him. "You managed, but with a little guidance, you'll have control again," I said softly. He looked at me with a gaze I had never seen before, filled with a mixture of humility and respect. "You've changed everything in this house," he said. I never realized how much we took for granted." His words echoed in my mind long after I left the room. It was true. For years, my presence had been ignored, my work undervalued, my voice silenced. And now, in the aftermath of his collapse, in the stillness after crisis, they were finally seeing me, not just as someone who served, but as someone who mattered, whose knowledge, calmness, and care could no longer be overlooked. The children, too, began to respond differently. Sarah, the youngest, approached me one afternoon with a hesitant smile. "Can you teach me to cook like you?" she asked softly. I nodded, a warmth spreading through me that I had never felt before. As we moved through the kitchen together, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, and learning to time the steps just right, I realized that respect and connection often grow in small, quiet ways. Teaching her was not just about cooking, it was about showing her that everyone has value, that everyone's contributions matter, that even those once invisible can become central to a household when given the chance. That evening, Mrs. Martin came to me quietly, her eyes glistening. I've been thinking," she said slowly. "We treated you poorly, and I don't know if I can ever make up for it, but seeing how capable and caring you are, I feel like we've been blind for so long." I reached out, touching her hand gently. "You don't have to make up for anything. Just recognizing it now, that's enough." She nodded, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. I felt a profound sadness for the years lost, for the moments of dismissal and indifference, but I also felt a quiet triumph, proof that actions, not words, can teach people the lessons they resist. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the balance in the house shifted. The Martins no longer treated me as invisible. They consulted me, asked for my input, and relied on my judgment. And with every passing day, I felt more secure in the knowledge that the crisis had revealed not just my capabilities, but the gaps in their understanding of trust, respect, and humility. One particularly quiet night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone by the window, reflecting on the journey so far. The rain tapped gently against the glass, echoing the soft rhythm of my heartbeat, and I realized that what had begun as mere duty had grown into something deeper. The family that had once treated me like a servant now depended on me in ways I had never anticipated. But the most important shift was internal. They had started to see me as a person, as someone whose presence and knowledge mattered. I knew challenges remained. Pride and old habits die slowly, and I would have to navigate future moments with patience and care. But I also understood something crucial. Strength often shows itself in quiet crises, respect is earned through calm competence, and sometimes the very people who dismiss you first are the ones who will come to rely on you most when life demands it. And in that quiet night, I felt a deep sense of purpose and calm, knowing that the moment I had stepped forward in fear, in crisis, I had carved a place for myself that could never be erased. My presence was no longer optional. My voice could no longer be ignored. And the invisible servant of yesterday had become the indispensable guide, the quiet force holding the household together, the one whose calm, steady hands had ensured that life continued when it could so easily have slipped away. And I realized then, with a slow, steady certainty, that being essential was not about pride or revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about showing that even those treated as insignificant can hold the power to save, to protect, and to transform the lives of those who once dismissed them. The weeks that followed solidified a change in the household that I had once thought impossible. The Martins, who had treated me as invisible, distant, and unimportant, now approached life with a newfound understanding of my presence. And with that understanding came a subtle but undeniable respect that no words alone could convey. Each morning, the routines that had once felt like servitude now carried a quiet authority. Mr. Martin asking for my advice on his medications, the children seeking guidance in small tasks, Mrs. Martin pausing before each request to consider my expertise rather than assuming it was beneath notice. It was as if the crisis had awakened something in all of them, forcing them to see the depth of my care, the steadiness of my hands, the patience of my mind, and the compassion of my heart. The transformation was not immediate, and it was not perfect. Old habits lingered, and moments of doubt would flicker in their eyes, but the foundation had been laid, and with every day, the cracks of pride, indifference, and oversight slowly gave way to acknowledgement, humility, and gratitude. One afternoon, as I organized the study, Mr. Martin came up to me, holding a folder of papers, his expression calm but serious. "I've realized," he said quietly, "that we've underestimated how much we need you not just to keep this house running but to guide us, to teach us, to remind us what matters." I looked at him, my heart softening, recognizing the vulnerability behind his words. "I never wanted to be needed for recognition," I said gently. "I just wanted to help when it mattered." He nodded, a quiet understanding passing between us. And then Mrs. Martin approached, a small, tentative smile on her lips. "I owe you more than I can ever say," she whispered. "We all do. We took your presence for granted for so long, and now I see that we were wrong." Her words were heavy with sincerity, the kind of apology that carries years of unspoken regret, and I felt a deep warmth in my chest, not from pride, but from the quiet knowledge that patience, skill, and quiet strength could finally break through walls that had seemed impenetrable. Even the children began to show subtle changes, the smallest gestures that spoke volumes. Sarah, once shy and distant, now lingered beside me while I cooked, asking questions and learning not only the practical skills of daily life, but also the quiet lessons of respect, diligence, and empathy. Her older brother began helping with tasks around the house, seeking my advice, and gradually learning that guidance is not a weakness, nor is acknowledging someone's capability a threat to his own authority. That evening, as the house settled into its usual rhythm of quiet, I sat by the window, reflecting on the journey that had begun with fear and indifference, and had moved through crisis and dependence to a place of recognition and respect. The rain fell softly, and the gentle tapping against the glass mirrored the calm I felt within. I realized then that the story of our household was not simply one of servitude or obedience. It was a story of transformation, of how circumstances can reveal true character, and how those who dismiss others may ultimately depend on the very people they once overlooked. Mr. Martin approached me quietly that night, sitting on the couch beside me, his hand resting gently over mine. "I want you to know," he said softly, "that from now on, we will see you for who you truly are. Not just as someone who helps, but as someone who matters. Someone whose actions, judgment, and heart are essential to this family." His words filled me with a quiet, steady warmth, a sense of closure and progress that I had longed for in the early days when I moved silently through the house, unnoticed and undervalued. I smiled gently, squeezing his hand. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." And in that moment, I realized that the true power of recognition is not about acknowledgement alone. It is about mutual understanding, about the moment when those who once overlooked you begin to rely on you not out of fear or necessity, but because they recognize your worth, your strength, and your compassion. Over the following days, the household continued to shift. Requests became collaborations rather than orders. Advice became discussions rather than commands. And a quiet camaraderie grew, fragile at first, but strong in its sincerity. I was still the one who managed medications, prepared meals, and guided the household through small crises. But now my presence was met with gratitude, not indifference. With trust, not dismissal. With acknowledgement, not invisibility. And I noticed something else. The Martins were not only learning to see me, they were learning to see themselves more clearly. Pride softened, humility grew, and a sense of family expanded to include me not as a servant, but as a partner in the rhythm of life, a quiet guardian of stability and calm. One evening, as I sat at the dining table with Mrs. Martin, she reached out, placing her hand over mine. "We've learned something important," she said, her voice calm and sincere. "That sometimes, the people we ignore are the ones who hold everything together. That strength doesn't always come from authority or position, but from care, consistency, and courage." Her words resonated deeply. I realized that our story was larger than my own experience. It was a lesson in humility, in recognition, and in the quiet power of resilience. And when I looked at Mr. Martin, at the children, and at Mrs. Martin, I saw not only gratitude but a transformation that went deeper than mere words. I understood then that the invisible hand, the overlooked presence, could carry a household through fear, through crisis, and into understanding. And as the night settled, with the soft glow of the lamps casting warmth across the room, I felt a profound peace. The family that had once treated me as less than as someone replaceable had come to see me as essential. Not because I demanded it, not because I sought it, but because circumstances revealed my worth in the quietest, most meaningful ways. And I understood something quietly powerful. Respect is earned not through insistence, but through action, patience, and courage. Recognition often comes not with demand, but with the moment when those who once ignored you realize they cannot do without you. And in that realization, in the slow unfolding of understanding and trust, I finally felt free, not just from their indifference, but from the weight of invisibility that had defined my life before that rainy day when crisis revealed my true strength. And as I leaned back in my chair, listening to the soft hum of the night, I whispered to myself a thought that had grown slowly and surely inside me over these weeks. Sometimes, being invisible is not the end of your story, but the beginning of your power. And when life demands it, the very people who doubted you will be the ones who rely on you most.